Oh, I know where that is.
Where is that?
That's in the Will Rogers.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's a picture of Will Rogers statue there. Now,
And
that's Mama and Papa,
Papa.
Grandma and Grandpa Slimmer.
They were younger.
Yeah, on one of our trips.
Let's see. And
That's
Mama.
Grandma.
Yeah.
That's Grandpa and Aunt Francie in South Bend.
Yeah.
He's got his camera on his shoulder.
Was he a picture nut?
Yeah. And that's Grandma and Grandpa and Jimmy on one of our trips out west. There you've got Tootsie and Dorothy and Madeline and Mama.
And those are all sisters.
And yeah, and I don't know, Madeline and my mother were sisters, and Dorothy and Tootsie were our sisters. They're half sisters.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's anyone sitting in the car. I can't tell.
Yeah, there's somebody, but I don't know.
That's Aunt Joan and Grandpa.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's me. And that's me. And that's Grandpa in his mailman's uniform.
Okay.
And that's in California, Grandpa, and that's Grandma getting out of the car. That one. That's Grandma on one of their trips.
Oh, that was on the trip.
And this is walking down the street.
With two boys.
Yeah.
Sure.
Can't see who's who.
I like that picture.
Yeah, my grandma's sitting in a chair.
I think that's
reading.
I just think it's a fantastic
Yeah.
American.
There they are again, and that's very young Grandma and Grandpa. Yeah. And that's Jimmy and Grandma on our trips out west. Yeah.
So you guys took a lot of trips?
Yeah. And that's Mama from back in the 1917.
Beautiful picture.
Yeah.
She's beautiful.
Yeah. 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 That's just beautiful. And that's Grandma Mush.
So that's your
In front of the house. Yeah, that's my grandmother. In front of the house on Oakley Avenue, the front house.
That's the front house, and you guys lived in the back?
Yeah, and those are the steps going up to the front house, and that's house next door and the one after it.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's Jimmy. She's holding him.
Yeah. I guess we'll go back.
That's Grandma. That's in front
Did
of.
you guys have a puppy dog?
Yeah, we had a dog. Now I don't know. Those are three of Mama's sisters,
Okay.
half sisters.
Okay.
I don't know who they
Those are
They're Grandpa Munch's daughters.
daughters. Okay. But
By
they're
his
not,
first wife.
So they're not a blood relation. They're
No.
just a family relation.
Yeah. As far as I know.
And there were 9 girls, you said?
And that's Grandpa on his horse when he was in the cavalry.
And he was in the cavalry, what?
He was in the National Guard and in the cavalry. Yeah.
Was that before you were born?
Way
Way
before.
before
That
I was
was
born.
Before the First World War. That was
Okay.
about early 1917 or late 1916.
So that was, now you said Willis was born
In
in
18.
18, so.
So that was, yeah,
When were your parents married?
1917.
Okay, so this is around the time.
That's Grandpa sitting in his mailman's uniform on the front porch of Grandma's house.
Okay.
And that's Papa taking pictures from the front porch of our house.
Now is that...
No, that's South Bend. That was Dorothy and Tootsie
Okay.
house in South
Okay,
Bend.
that's probably the same time as some of those other pictures they take.
Yeah.
So he liked to take pictures.
Oh yeah, there he is. His Camrys. One of our trips.
Who's that?
And that's Uncle Willis and Grandpa
Okay.
in front of the house in Chicago.
Now that was...
That was about 1942.
So was that the house that I would remember?
No.
That's
it wasn't
still the other
remembered.
house?
That was Oakley Avenue.
Okay.
And he looks like he's going to play golf, but he never did play golf. That scene. That's him. Whoops. With the car. And that's in South Bend too, Grandma and Grandpa. Whoops.
Yeah, I would go around.
That's at one of our conventions,
Okay.
Grandpa.
I wonder where that is.
Yeah.
Be interesting to blow it up. And
May
figure
have been in Seattle or someplace like that, because we took a lot of those trips. That's him again. Good looking.
out. I
Wait.
keep trying to zoom
Get it
in.
focused, it would help, yeah.
Yeah, well, it picks up other things.
That's Uncle Tommy with Grandpa
Yeah.
on Oakley Avenue. So this is
Okay.
all in the 40s.
Okay.
Yeah. That, you even saw that one now down.
There's some pictures that kind of fell.
Yeah.
That's
Grandpa.
the grandpa the face that I, the age
Yeah.
probably I remember.
Yeah. Sitting out having a comfortable party. That's Grandma and Grandpa again. Looks like out in front of the house. That's him during the First World War.
Oh, really?
That's,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Probably down in Texas, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Now you said, so your mother followed him down there
Yeah,
before they were married,
yeah.
and then,
She took the train down, and she stayed with the officers' wives.
and then,
So there was no scandal.
and then before
Then
he
they-
went overseas.
They moved back. They came back to Chicago, and he got married,
Uh-huh.
and in the rectory,
And they were when's
July 23rd, 1917.
Okay. And then he went.
He went
shortly
over-
thereafter.
He went overseas then. After that,
Do you know how long he was overseas?
well, he was through 1918. I think.
Yeah.
Didn't get back, I guess, until maybe 1919,
Oh, okay.
probably. Yeah.
So he probably wasn't there when.
No, he wasn't
Willis
there
was
when
born?
Will Willis was born. No.
Okay.
That's looks like him above there with his suitcase there, one above it.
Well, let's see. I could try to.
Yeah, that's coming home, I
Oh,
gather,
my.
from the war.
Oh well, I was gonna pause it, but I missed it.
Yeah,
There's that another picture we see.
yeah,
that one.
that's you're going back to that one
Yeah.
with your father.
A little bit. I wonder how
Yeah,
old do you
with
think
her.
he might have been?
That was our dog. Tommy sent him home from Germany. That
Oh,
was
really?
Red. He was part dog, German Shepherd, and part fox.
Okay.
He was red color, just like a fox, and had a fluffy tail. He was whenever a plane went overhead, he'd hide because he was
From-
over in Germany in the
Yeah.
services at that. He was a war dog in there.
Okay. Well, so.
And he was something else. I mean, he'd jump on top of a car and he'd climb trees because he was part fox.
Yeah. Oh, that's.
He followed Mama around all the time.
Oh, really?
She'd turn around and step on him half the time. His grandpa in the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, all your older brothers went
Yeah.
overseas and served in Germany.
Yeah, no.
Or different. Were they all in
Willis
the
was
Army?
in the Air Force. He joined before 1941, before Pearl Harbor,
Uh-huh.
and he was in the Air Force. He was a navigator, and he served in a lot of secret places, but mostly down in South America and so forth, flying
Oh, wow.
around there. In fact, he was lost for some time. He was burned badly in a plane crash. We couldn't even get in touch with him. We tried the Red Cross and they wouldn't do anything. So finally got through the
Oh, that's.
chaplain and found out that he was all right. But,
Uh-huh.
and then Robert served in Guam
Mm-hmm.
and in the Pacific.
Oh, okay.
He was a radio operator and in the Air Force.
Uh-huh.
And Tommy, well, he served in the Engineer Corps, and he ended up in Burma
Huh.
when they had with the fighting the Japanese in Burma and everything. And the Chinese at that time were allies, and he was driving a truck, and they forced him off the road.
Oh, really?
Our so-called allies at that time.
Yeah.
And his truck, he jumped out of the truck luckily, but his truck it was just smashed to smithereens off the mountainside.
Oh, my.
And he ended up in the hospital in India with 2 broken kneecaps.
Wow.
And but Tommy served in all different. I mean, he was in Korea, and he was the officer's cook
Uh-huh.
in a lot of places. And then he was in charge of rest and recreation in Korea.
Uh-huh.
And he was in the front lines there with the cooking, and he had his stomach was pretty well blown apart, so he had patent mesh in his stomach. That was
Well, how did that happen? I mean,
that was
I
working
guess,
up in the they had to have cooks up in the front
right,
lines.
yeah, so, I mean,
Yes.
he was,
So he was
wow.
up there. So
I didn't know that.
yeah, that's why he got a medical discharge. And he served on the East Coast in Connecticut with the Nikes,
The what?
the Nike missiles at the first
okay.
missile bases up there.
Okay,
And he traveled all around the world
yeah.
in his 22 years in service.
Yeah. And then you said then he worked in a hotel?
He came home. Then he worked in a hotel when he came home as a clerk. Usually a night clerk. He liked that because then he could watch all the baseball games and everything during the day.
Yeah, I remember going to baseball
Yeah.
games with him when he came to visit. I remember Uncle Frank and Uncle
Yeah.
Tommy coming to visit. And so what did Uncle Frank do?
Uncle Frank was, he worked in the tool manufacturer. He was a tool inspector.
Uh-huh.
And he decided he wanted to go into the service. He could have gotten a deferment because of his work.
Right.
But he went in and he served in Patton's army.
Oh, really?
The
Oh.
Battle of the Bulge and everything. And he was also an MP over in Belgium.
Oh, wow.
So, and Tommy served in Germany after the war. He was in Gray's registration after the war. So, they had their fill.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I think Jimmy went over. After we moved to the house on Patterson in 1945, after the surrender and everything, he was inducted into the service, and he ended up over in Europe, and he and Tommy got together and they traveled Europe.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, I'll
on
have to
furloughs
ask
and
him
stuff.
about that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I didn't know
they
that.
traveled all over there. And Tommy got a car, and then Jimmy drove it, of course, because after that accident in Burma, Tommy wouldn't
Yeah.
drive anymore.
Oh,
He
yeah.
never drove since then.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Well, I guess living in Chicago, it wasn't too bad.
yeah.
So.
Oh, you had transportation, everything. And he had friends that would pick him up and take him wherever he wanted to go. So.
I didn't know he'd injured his knees like that.
Oh, he had 2 broken kneecaps, and
Wow.
that was why he had trouble walking all the
Yeah,
time.
I had no
Because of
idea.
that, yeah.
So,
Yeah, and he had platinum mesh in his stomach.
wow.
He had,
No, I had no idea that, he'd gone through all of that. I mean, I was just a
Yeah,
kid, so that's
yeah,
amazing.
that's.
I mean, I
They didn't
remember-
talk about a lot of those things.
Yeah.
He used to tell stories about when he was cooking in Burma and that. And
Uh-huh.
he said that they cooked monkey and everything else. He said they wouldn't tell the men until after they ate what they had eaten, and then they'd all go running.
Ooh, monkey yum.
Yeah, monkey. I guess it was just as good as any other meat.
Tasted like chicken.
Yeah.
Just like frog.
Yeah.
That's right.
He has pictures when he was running the rest of recreation in Korea, the snow geese that went by.
We lost it.
Hi
Hold on.
everybody, I'm Dan Beardorf. Where would you go for a home equity?
Well, that was fun.
Yeah. So, Grandpa probably be doing his books. He always kept all the records.
His grandma.
Yeah, Grandma. Sitting at the table with him. Yeah. That was on one of our trips. And the cars we had.
This one didn't come out real well.
Yeah. There were a lot of pictures in there. Another picture, Grandma, and then one above that.
And the picture in the center?
That's Grandma
Grandma.
down there. And that's the car we had.
Oh, okay.
The Packard, that was one of the first cars we had.
You said you took the streetcar.
Yeah, most of
Where?
the places.
And who's that?
I think that's Aunt Madeline.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's your that's your
That's
mother's.
mother's older sister.
Okay.
So she
So was your mother the youngest of the three?
no, my mother was
The middle.
Madeline was the oldest, and my mother,
Uh huh.
and then came the 3 daughters or whatever from Grandpa Mush,
Uh huh.
and then came Tootsie, Francie, and Dorothy.
Okay.
So there were 8 of them all
8
together.
girls.
Yeah,
Okay.
all 8 girls.
Okay. And no boys.
And Grandma used to, Madeline was a fashion plate.
Okay.
And they'd go down to Marshall Fields and they'd look at a dress in the window and they wanted, and they'd tell Grandma, and she'd come go down and look at it, and she'd come and make it for them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she could sew anything up
Oh, wow.
for them.
I didn't know that. I didn't
She
know
was
she
tremendous.
Could sew.
Oh, she, not my,
Your
my
grandmother.
grandmother, yeah.
Okay.
She was terrific at that. And, well, she used to work as a maid for Potter Palmer's family.
Huh.
She was an upstairs maid for them.
Okay. Well, how did your mother's father die? Do you know?
My mother's father, they said, died of tuberculosis.
Okay.
They were out on a farm, and
Okay.
they were so poor that they had a pauper's grave. They don't even know where it is.
And what was his name?
That was von Wykowski.
Von Wykowski.
I don't know his first name. She never
Okay.
did say. I know the last name was von Wykowski.
Okay. So,
And he came from Prussia. He was a Prussian baron.
and he left during.
He left to get away from the service in the, it must have been around the 1890s.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they came over on the boats in those days there.
Well, it must have been a little earlier than that, because well, maybe not.
I don't know,
He came over and then
or 1880s or 1890s.
Yeah,
I
around
don't
there,
in
yeah.
that period of time.
then
Yeah,
came over, marries your grandmother, and then
yeah,
has your
yeah.
mother.
They had my aunt and my mother.
Okay.
You can see the shoes they're wearing
Oops,
in that
uh-oh,
picture.
uh-oh.
No, that picture. That's my mother
We'll go back. Wait.
over there, right above that.
Sorry.
No, above, over
Okay.
there, over there.
There.
And then in this picture there where she's wearing my father's helmet
Okay,
from the
we'll
war.
come back down. We'll be back down. Sorry.
Yeah,
I do so well with mechanical
there.
devices.
And she's wearing my father's helmet when he came back from
Oh.
service. They lived with my grandmother there at that time.
Okay.
And then they moved to Gary, Indiana.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So, were any of you guys born in Indiana?
Robert and Willis, I believe, were born in Indiana. In Gary.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
They
moved
lived
back?
with my father's mother at that time.
And she was in Indiana
Yeah.
at that time.
In Gary, yeah. They said that she was something of a hellion, I guess. She said she married Grandpa Mayu. I never knew him either.
Oh, okay.
But she was in California, and he was building a house for her in Gary. And she came back, and she said the kitchen and the bedroom were facing the wrong direction, so she made him take it apart, tear it down, and redo the bedroom where she in the direction.
And this is your grandmother?
That's my father's mother.
Your father's mother. So, but Grandpa Mayu, that wasn't Grandpa Slimmer's dad.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know why he would be Slimmer and she would
Well,
be Mayus unless it was that. So
Yeah, but I mean, he could have been adopted. I
we
guess.
never got any
information.
information except that she was his mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one you can
And
use
Dorothy
it.
and Tootsie used to have to go and babysit for Robert and France, and they'd go to Gary and help when they were in their
Okay.
teens,
Okay.
and they would help out. They said that Grandma had to do the laundry in the basement and carry it all the way up to the attic in order to hang it up and dry it,
Oh wow.
and things like that. And Grandma Mayu was sick, and she wouldn't let anyone into her room except my father. But they had to bring up the tray and that to her bedroom and put it outside, and he had to bring it into her.
No, but he was.
She was something else. I mean,
Yeah. And you didn't know. Then you didn't know your grandfather, his father, at all.
I didn't know his father. I didn't know his stepfather. I didn't know his mother.
Okay.
See, they all died before I was born.
Okay. You just know of them.
Yeah. And Grandpa Mush died in 1920, about the time my brother Robert was born.
Okay.
So I didn't know him either.
Mhm.
And he worked in the cemetery in Chicago.
Huh.
Yeah. He took care of the grounds and that.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful cemetery. They have swans and everything else.
Well, is he buried?
He's buried in that cemetery where he worked. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I'd ever find a grave, but
Yeah.
I used to go there on Sundays. Dorothy and Tootsie and I would sometimes go after church, and we'd go and have lunch, and then we'd go visit the cemetery.
Okay. Is there more family than just him buried there, or is it mostly?
I think that's it.
Okay.
But it was an outing that we had, and
Yeah.
that was around, must have been around Lawrence or Montrose, and the cemetery in around that area, near the lake.
Okay.
So it was a Sunday jaunt for us.
Yeah. Well, it's probably a nice.
I guess I was a little spoiled. I used to go with them, different things, and then our other the St. Joseph Cemetery, where my little sister's buried, and where Grandma is buried, Grandma Mish. Then we used to go there, and that was the end of the line. You had to go to the end of the line and transfer and wait for a bus
Oh, really?
that would take you to the cemetery.
Oh, okay.
Now, of course, it's right near Melrose Park or so.
Okay.
It's near where Robert and Mary used to live.
Oh, okay.
But the city has moved out that way. It's all
Yeah.
part of the city
Just
now.
like every other major city is
Yeah.
sprawled.
And well, the grandpa and grandma and Frank and Tommy are all buried there.
Oh, okay.
And Aunt Madeline's buried with Grandma and Carol. And there's one plot left, and if I ever find the papers and write them, that's where I said I'd probably want to be buried there.
Oh, okay.
But I said, decided to be cremated. It's a lot cheaper than shipping a body back to Chicago. Just take the urn back and bury it there.
Yeah.
But and at the time that Carol died in 1928, I think they paid $27 or something like that for the 4 plots.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
So that's when they got it?
yeah.
Was that time?
They got it to bury her as a baby.
How old was she?
She was 7 months, I believe,
And what
or not
happened?
even that. May she died. She was had her in the buggy on the front porch, and the neighbor kids wanted to see the baby and play with her, and they had the measles and didn't know it, and so the baby got the measles and developed into diphtheria. And
Oh, wow.
killed Dorothy with Mama.
Okay. Young.
Yeah, very young Dorothy.
Now, I wonder where that was.
Gee, it's not South Bend.
Yeah, maybe they were visiting someone.
Could be visiting some
Yeah.
relative or something.
You were a baby, it's Carol? Or Carol?
Carol Phyllis.
Carol Phillips.
She was born December 26th of 1928,
Oh, really?
and
So
she
she
died in May of
She was
1929.
very young baby.
Yeah, very young baby.
Yeah, it had to be very hard on your mother.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, she had 4 boys and then a
Yeah.
girl and then the second girl. And
Yeah,
then Jimmy came along in 1930.
yeah.
Jimmy was the only one who was born in a hospital. All the rest of us were born at home.
Oh, really?
But born at 4040. I was born at 4041 North Oakley. So,
The other
I don't know.
goes.
yeah. Oh, Papa's hidden. It looks like the front porch by Grandma's. And,
Okay.
yeah. Dorothy sold that house. She and Toots and moved out to South Bend.
Okay.
That's the kitchen out
Yeah.
on the house on what the heck, I can't remember the street anymore.
Patterson.
Patterson.
So that's the
Patterson.
house I've seen.
That's, yeah,
The kitchen I've seen.
and Patterson, yeah. That's when you knew.
Yeah.
There's some more Grandma and Grandpa. We did a lot of traveling.
Uh-huh.
I mean, every 2 years or so we'd travel. We'd travel to Canada, we traveled to the New England states, we traveled to California, we traveled to Washington State, I mean, all over. And we, of course, went down to New Orleans and to Florida.
Uh-huh.
And, so we did a lot of.
Did you have many, I mean, I know you had relatives locally in Illinois. Did you have relatives other places? I mean, did you know any of your other relatives?
Well, I remember some. We had relatives in Rockford,
Uh-huh.
and then we had the ones in Avondale, and then we had Uncle Andrew Schmal and Tana Anna Schmal who's in Chicago. It was at that time it was toward the end of the Irving Park line. It was about where we moved to eventually.
And how were they related?
Those were grandma's relatives. Of course, Willis and his family lived down in New Orleans.
Right, yeah.
So we had that. That's all that I know of her.
Yeah, you don't, so your father's side of the family, you don't know a lot
No.
about?
All I know is I said after he died, we found out that he was born in Atlanta. And he had curls, real long curls, when he was small. And my brother Willis inherited the wavy hair.
Oh, did he?
The rest of us got straight hair.
What does your straight hair?
Yeah, it was
For the
fairly
most part?
straight, yeah. But, we had fun. We used to travel a lot. We'd take off. Papa had a day off during the week, and we'd get in the car and we'd go to Joliet for lunch or something like that. And we'd go to the parks along the way to see the Indian mountains.
He liked to enjoy himself then.
Yeah, he enjoyed taking us with him.
Yeah, well, that's good.
And we, all these parks and do all the sightseeing and the rocks and everything else. The Indian Mountains Park. I don't know if Mama enjoyed it, traveling as much as we did, but she went along all the time. So.
I guess that's at one of your front doors.
Yeah. That looks like.
It's hard to know.
Yeah. Looks like a backward photo of the house on Patterson.
It might be.
Yeah.
It might be.
Yeah.
A reprint.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
The mailbox on the side there. Yeah. Because I know the mailbox was on the right side of the door, not the left. But I don't know how they would have reversed it.
You said your parents met. Probably they were working.
They
the same
probably
company?
they were working together, I think. Yeah.
And that's how they probably met.
And that cut glass pitcher and the glasses that matched.
Mm-hmm.
That was his present to her when they got engaged.
Oh really? Oh wow.
Yes. So
Oh wow.
that has a story to
Oh
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really neat.
Yeah.
So they got engaged, and then he went down to Texas.
Yeah, he was in the National Guard at the time.
So
They
and
called
she
up the
followed
National
him.
Guard.
I'm not.
And Dorothy used to tell me a lot of stories about them, Dorothy and Toots, because they were growing up at that time.
Yeah. So there's several years, I guess, between
Yeah,
them.
there was about at least 10 years or
Okay.
more between them.
That kind of put them kind of in between all of you, then,
Mm-hmm.
as far
Yeah.
as an age range.
I always felt that it was the same age. As old as they got, they were still the same age to me.
Oh
You
yeah,
just,
yeah.
But Dorothy and Tootsie had a hard life. Grandma, they had, at that time, they said the way those mortgages were written at that time, you paid interest, but that didn't pay off the loan, the principal. It just was interest on the loan.
You just kept paying interest?
You just kept paying interest. And when they sold the house and paid off the loan,
Uh-huh.
the woman who held it was complained because that was her income for her life.
Oh my.
That interest was keeping her.
Well.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
But
did.
that's the way, I mean, in those days they had to, you didn't pay down on your principal. That was, because that was usury, I mean, in those
Yeah.
days. That was the way that the mortgage, and
Yeah.
they didn't know enough to know better
Yeah.
when those things were taken out.
Well, I guess that's when we were starting, I mean, as a country, into really getting into credit. And I
Yeah.
guess it got real big probably after World War II, didn't it?
Yeah.
The credit industry.
Yeah.
People didn't, I don't guess, use as
Yeah,
much credit
until
as
that
they do
time.
now.
No. But
He used a ton of credit now.
yeah, Toots told a lot of stories too. The house that they lived in originally burned down when Toots was a baby,
Oh, really?
and she said from age about 1 year until 5 or 6 she didn't walk, and they didn't know what was wrong with her. And then all
She
of a
was
sudden,
afraid?
no,
Or
I
she
don't
just
know.
didn't
It's just
walk?
that she couldn't walk,
Huh.
and they lived in the basement of the house when it burned, and then neighbors took them in for a while. They lived there until they could build another house.
Oh, wow.
And the house that they built was the one that we lived in the back. 'Cause
Okay.
when they built the brick house in front and they moved it back,
Huh.
it was on the same lot. But he said my grandfather, uh, in order to get the property, he worked for the city.
Oh, really?
And the city didn't have money to pay them, so they paid them off in property.
Oh, wow.
And that's how they got the property that they built the house on.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Well, but if they didn't have money to pay him, how do you pay for
They
other
did.
things?
It's just...
I mean, how do
Yeah,
you?
Grandma told me that at Christmas time, she said that they got a nickel for Christmas, and that was tremendous. I mean,
Yeah.
they were rich then. It's how money
Well, yeah.
was, yeah.
Yeah, we have no clue.
Nothing.
We have no clue.
And they walked, their church was 2 miles away.
Uh-huh.
They used to walk to the church in snow and everything else. Until my grandmother got together with a lot of other people, and they met at what was then the butcher shop, and decided to build the church, St. Benedict's Church.
Oh, really?
They were the founding members of the church.
Huh. That's neat.
Yeah.
But now, your mom and her family was Catholic.
Yeah.
And your dad, as far as you knew, was a Baptist.
He was a Baptist.
But he became Catholic when you were.
I was about 6th grade.
Okay.
Yeah. Because every year he used to end up with pneumonia, or so, because in those days they did 3 deliveries a day.
Oh, yeah.
And they'd have to go in, it was freezing cold, they'd go in and he was right near a radiator
Right.
and throw the mail and get ready for the next shift and go back out again. So you're in the cold and out and all the time. So he used to get pneumonia all the time.
Oh, really?
Too.
Wow.
Well, and then he had, one of the mayors of Chicago was had his business on his route, and when Papa was in the hospital with the cancer, he came to visit him and sent him flowers and stuff like that. So, but he was well liked. He had a lot of apartment buildings on his route. So, and a couple winters I worked with him.
Oh, did you?
And we could, hire on as Christmas help.
Uh-huh.
And I'd get my brother's pants and the long underwear and wear it. But he'd take me with him on his route and let me in the apartment buildings to put in the different slots, so I didn't have to go out too much in the cold. And I learned to throw the mail and things like that. It was interesting.
Yeah.
I was going to grammar school and high school.
Yeah, well, that's kind of neat. And he worked for the post office, and then he retired, and
He retired after 36 years, I think it was,
Okay.
something like that. And then he started working for a brokerage firm downtown as a runner, and then started doing their bookkeeping, and ended up as their bookkeeper.
oh, wow. So he had a head for numbers.
Yeah. He never graduated 8th grade. In
But
those days they didn't.
Yeah,
They had to go out to work right away.
Yeah.
So,
but he had a good head for numbers.
yeah,
Oh, that's neat.
yeah. So.
That's neat. And then, how long did he work for the I guess he worked for them and then retired?
Yeah, he worked for him quite a few years until moved. I guess until he was past his 70s.
Yeah.
but,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So
Wow.
he enjoyed it, and of course when he was home, he knew all the women in the neighborhood. He knew all of them because he did the shopping.
Oh, really?
He did all the shopping. Yeah.
Your mother didn't go?
No, she didn't. Once in a while she'd go with him. Most of the time she
Uh-huh.
was home.
Okay. You
Yeah. She did the cooking and
he did the
the
shop.
shopping, and he did the dishes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that works.
Yeah. Frank said it used to be so funny when they'd be sitting downstairs and watching soap operas or something, and they'd get mad at each other. And he said one would knock their cane on the floor, and the other one would knock their cane. It used to be funny.
Oh, that's
But,
funny.
but Mama, every morning she got up and made breakfast for every single one of us as we left for work. All the years I can remember.
Now, how long did you stay? I mean, you said you moved away to California in '67.
Well, I stayed until I got married.
Uh-huh.
I lived at home until I was
Okay.
62.
Okay.
Moved into our apartment, and then in '67 Frank decided he wanted to go to California. The business was better out here. So we came out and found an apartment, and then we drove back to Chicago, and
Packed up.
yeah. That winter of the big snow in Chicago, he was out here doing on sales and conventions and so forth, and I was home. And when he came back, he had sent me money to fly here and visit him in California, and then I went back, and then he decided he wanted to move out here, so we drove out and drove around till we found an area we liked and rented an apartment,
Uh-huh.
and then shipped all our stuff out. Had it all packed up, and we left the day after their wedding anniversary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many years were they married? Do you know?
Well, let's see, Grandma died in 70,
70, so it was 53.
53 years. Yeah.
Almost somewhere around there.
Yeah.
You
was
said
over
she died
53.
just before Christmas.
She
right?
died on the 21st of December.
What-
She had just finished making all her Christmas cookies and sat down at the dining room table to read the paper, and she had a heart attack.
Oh, did she?
Yeah. The doctor said her heart was just worn out.
She took care of her business for the day.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, she'd never go to the hospital for anything. She always said if she went to the hospital, she wouldn't come back.
Well,
And that was true.
yeah, that was true for some people. So
Yeah,
yeah.
so.
I,
But Grandpa was so mad because he said she wasn't supposed to die before he did. Yes, he was sick all the time, and he was the one.
sounds like they cared about each other.
Oh
too.
yeah. He had the colostomy for all those years too.
Yeah.
And he used to travel to the hospitals and talk to the people before they underwent to let them know that there was life after the
Oh, I didn't
operation and
know.
everything. And
Well, how long had he lived with that? He'd had it for a while. I mean, I remember.
it's great.
Oh, I didn't know
Almost.
that. Oh wow, he
Yeah.
was young.
Yeah,
Oh wow.
I think so. Yeah. Well, he went in the hospital for his general checkup,
Uh-huh.
and the doctor found the cancer.
Oh
And
wow.
that was way before they did a lot of this. And the family doctor called in a specialist, and two of them did the operation. And after, it got to the point where Edry had to have specialists to do that, but they did it. And never had trouble. Once in a while he'd get his bowel would get snarled up or something, but.
I didn't know
Yeah.
that. I mean, I knew as a.
And then you have to, with the colostomy bag, you have to irrigate and everything all the time. So.
Yeah, I remember him coming to visit, but I thought that was something that happened more recent to when. I guess he came to visit in the early '70s
Yeah.
when we were in Cleveland,
Mhm.
and I remember that he'd had. But I thought that was recent.
No.
I didn't
no.
know. Oh wow!
No,
I
he
guess
had
he
that.
lived a long
He
time.
had that for about 20 years or so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
yeah, they caught it just by a routine checkup.
Oh, that's
It was
good. That's really good.
But I've always since then. That's a good picture, Grandma. Yeah,
Is
that's
that-
got to be out in South Bend.
Did they go out there a lot?
We used to go out often. In fact, he and I drove back one time in the middle of a snowstorm, an ice storm too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but they would go out in the summer. And,
Was,
spend a couple, a day or so out there, and
that's, yeah, was his mom still out there at the time? Your grandmother? When you